The reason I like the aisle so much is it doesn't explain anything at all, which means you get to enjoy struggling for a few weeks while you try to figure out the game. And don't worry, I'm not going to take that away from you, but I will show you how to avoid the 10 most common beginner mistakes to make sure your experience isn't genuinely just frustrating. If you're a beginner, this video is going to have tons of useful information, and if you're more experienced, let me know if you agree with these. But the first mistake is the most infamous of all, which is installing the wrong game version. So let me know if this story sounds familiar. You open up the store and you pay the 20 bucks, cause it'll be worth it. So you start installing it, and after watching all the videos about the aisle, you're pumped to play. But when you finally do load in, something's a little off, cause all the servers are Chinese. And when you pick a server and load in, you can't even play the dinosaur. But don't worry, you didn't get scammed, you just installed the legacy version of the game, which was last updated on February 8th of 2022. So unless you want to run around like this guy, I'm going to show you how to do it properly. Open up Steam and find the aisle in the sidebar, then right click it and go down to Properties. When you click it, it'll open up this little menu, and you can click Game Versions and Betas and switch it over to Avrima. Now unfortunately, the game will have to start reinstalling, but after another 30 minutes, you'll finally be able to play the legendary dinosaur. But don't jump into a server just yet, because most people make this next mistake for weeks before realizing it, which is ignoring unofficial servers. Unofficial servers are way cooler than the official ones. Not only are they good for practicing your PvP, but some of them have player counts of over 400, along with some other cool features. And even though some of them are kinda silly, a lot of them are basically just better survival servers, with rules, population control, and active moderation to prevent cheaters. But if you're wondering what server to play, here's a quick breakdown. If you're looking for a survival server, Petite Pieds, Nerf NA, and Triassic are all pretty good options, with Petites being my personal favorite. But if you just want to practice your PvP instead, then I'd recommend Primal Deathmatch or Oasis Free Admin. So if you're looking for the best possible experience, consider trying out one of the unofficials. And now that you've picked a server and chosen your dinosaur, you're about to make the third most common mistake, which is walking around aimlessly. And I'm going to let Morning Voice Club Soda explain this one. Now the Isle is a game without many rules, so I'm not going to tell you exactly how to play, but I assume that you want to find other dinosaurs and not starve to death, so I'm going to give you a few tips to get started. When you spawn in, the first thing you want to do is hold down Q. Not only does this allow you to smell around for food, but more importantly, it opens your compass, which tells you all sorts of things about where you are and where you want to go. But for now, you should just head straight towards the sanctuary, which is basically a place where all the juveniles go to fight it out. If you're a herbivore, you come here to eat these red mushrooms, which you can smell in your compass. And if you're a carnivore, you basically just come here to eat the herbivores. But after dying in the sanctuary a few times, you might also notice these two symbols. This is the patrol zone and the migration zone. And these are kinda just adult versions of the sanctuary. Plants spawn here, herbivores come to eat them, and carnivores come to eat those herbivores. So now that you know where to go, I'm gonna show you how to grow. Because mistake number 4 is eating food that's not on your diet. So seriously listen closely, because I'm about to explain one of the most important mechanics in the game. As you can see, I'm a hungry boy, and we got two options for dinner, a T-Rex or a Diabloceratops. Which one should I go for? Well, you may have noticed the symbols are a little different. One of them's a bee, and one of them's just a meat stick. And that's because if we click tab, we can see that each dinosaur has their own list of preferred foods. And we can see that for my Omniraptor, the Diabloceratops is on there, but the T-Rex is not. Which means that while eating the T-Rex will fill up your stomach, you're effectively making no real progress. And I'll explain exactly what I mean. Right now, my growth rate's increased 0%, which means I'm growing at the base rate of 1x. But if I come over here and fill my stomach up with something on my diet like the Diabloceratops, watch what happens. My bee diet will actually start to fill up. And after filling up my stomach, we can see that my bee diet's at 98%, which is directly proportional to my growth rate. Which means since I ate the Diabloceratops instead of the T-Rex, I'm now growing almost 2 times faster. But now I'm going to show you how to take this to the next level and get all the way up to 4x. Because there's actually a smarter way to eat, because if you just killed a player, you can go up to the body and spam E, and it'll open it up. And once the body's fully open, all you gotta do is press G to start pulling out the organs. And the cool thing about organs is that even though the T-Rex wasn't on our diet, its organs actually are. And to make things better, organs actually give way more diet than regular food. You see, a normal bite of food will fill up your stomach 10% and give you 11% diet in return. But an organ will fill up your stomach the same 10% while giving you 22% diet in return. Which means organs are 2 times more delicious. So you should obviously go for organs whenever you have the choice. And one last thing that should be noted is that AI like deer don't actually give organs, so you have to earn them by killing other players. And this brings us to our next mistake, which is really more of a tip, which is using gastroliths and vomiting to increase your diet. If you're wondering how experienced players seem to get such good growth rates, let me show you. Normally after filling up your stomach, there's still more diets that you could eat, but since your stomach's full, you kind of just have to sit around and wait. But there are actually 2 ways to empty your stomach faster, and one of them is gastroliths. Right now, our stomach's draining at a rate of about 0.025 per tick, but we can actually make our stomach drain way faster. Because if I were to get up and run to these rocks over here, you'd see it gives me the option to forage for gastroliths. And if I were to go ahead and hold E, I would eat some of these rocks, and now if we click tab, we can see it says ingesting gastrolith. After eating those rocks, this effect will last for exactly 1 minute, and I'm going to show you what it does. Because if I check my stomach now, it's draining at a rate of about 0.11 per tick, which is more than 4 times faster than before. Which means if you want to drain your stomach as fast as possible, you need to eat 1 gastrolith per minute. And unfortunately, the effect does not stack, so you can't just have like 1,000 minutes of gastrolith. But there is actually a riskier method to drain your stomach way faster. Let's say I'm a baby Rex, and I just came across this huge body, and I want to get as much diet as I can. Well, right now my stomach's full, but if I keep eating anyways, it'll start to flash red, and eventually I'll throw up. This will significantly drain your stomach, water, and take a little bit of your diet. But if you can heal your sickness, then it's all worth it, because you can quickly pack your stomach with all sorts of diet and get an insane growth rate. And I do actually have one last trick before moving on, because if you throw up, then you can look for one of these pink salt licks. If you go up to it and hold E, you can cure your sickness instantly. And now that you know how to grow, it's time to talk about some survival mistakes. And the first most common one I see with beginners is not using free look. Being aware of your surroundings at all times is probably one of the most important skills in the Isle. But looking around can be extremely hard, because you have to constantly readjust your movement just to keep going straight. But luckily, the developers were nice enough to give us something called free look, which solves this exact issue. Because instead of having to constantly readjust, if you simply hold Alt, you can look all around you, and your dinosaur will keep going straight. And even though I don't have any friends to help demonstrate, you can just imagine how useful this is when you're getting chased. But I'd say this is most useful for Dino, because free look lets you stay exactly level while looking above the surface of the water, which means there's no risk of accidentally resurfacing. And one last bonus trick is that using scroll wheel can actually be super useful to get a better angle sometimes. But this brings us to mistake number 7, which is overestimating how much health you have. Because in the Isle, there is no health bar. And the only thing you have to go off of is how much red is on your screen, which makes it pretty hard to tell how much health you have, which can often mean you die a little quicker than you expected. But there is actually a sneaky trick you can use to estimate your health. Alright, I'm going to do my best to explain this real quick. Right now if I check my tab, we can see that everything looks good and healthy. And if I come over here and set myself to 50% health, we can see that everything is still fine. But the second I go below 50%, we can see that it says I'm wounded, which means we can always tell if we're below 50% health by checking our tab. But there's actually a way to calculate your exact health, by using bite force. Because normally my Serato would have a bite force of 150. But if I set myself to anything below 50% health, my bite force would start to deteriorate. And this continues to happen all the way down to 10% health, where my bite force is half of its original, which is 75 in this case. And we can see that it increases as I heal. But just to help you understand, I made a little visual for you, so I hope you appreciate it. Like I said, when you're below 10% health, you'll have 50% of your bite force, and when you're above 50, you'll have all of it. But this leaves a 40% variable gap, where if you reverse engineered your bite force, you could figure out your exact health. But since you still don't understand what I mean, I'm going to give you a quick example. Say we had 131 bite force, instead of the usual 150. Well, we know 131 is roughly 87% of 150, which means we have 87% of our bite force. And if 50%'s here and 100%'s here, then that means 87's about 3/4 of the way through, which comes out to about 40% health. Which means that by looking at our bite force, we were able to determine our exact health. But you don't need to do the exact math, because all you really need to know is that below 50% you'll be wounded, and at 10% you'll have half your bite force. But now it's time for what I think is one of the most important survival mistakes to fully understand, which is going below 60% stamina. Normally after losing a bit of stamina, if you were to just stop sprinting and start trotting for a bit, you'd be able to gain all your stamina back, all the way up to 100%. But this only happens if you're above 60% stamina. Because as soon as you sprint below the 60% line, you can trot till the end of time, and you won't gain back a single drop of stamina. Which means when you drop below 60%, you'll have to either rest by pressing H or slow walk by pressing Z to start gaining stamina back. Or you can just stand still. And aside from 60%, there's actually another threshold at 20%, and if you go below that, the only way to gain stamina back is resting. And now that you know a few tricks to help survive, I want to talk about some combat mistakes. And one of the most misunderstood combat mistakes I see is running while bleeding. And I'm going to show you exactly what I mean by this, but first, I want to give you a quick demo. Now that both Carnos have been hit by the same amount of bleed damage, I want you to watch the difference when I stand still versus when I sprint. And you can ignore my friends who are yapping in the background. But if you want to join my Discord, link in the description. And now that the bleed is healed, we can see that we lost way more bleed from sprinting than we did standing still, which means you should definitely avoid running while bleeding. But here's the interesting part that surprised me, which is that trotting and sprinting somehow both drain the exact same amount of blood over time. Which means since they drain the same amount, if you're bleeding, there's no real point in trotting, because you might as well just sprint. And when I tested resting, it was obviously the best, cutting off the bleed with 81% of our blood left. But here's what this actually means for combat. If you're slower than your opponent, then you need to find a place to stand still as soon as you can, because moving is only going to make you bleed faster. But if you're faster than your opponent, it might actually be worth making a run for it, since sprinting and trotting drain the same amount of blood anyways. And if you can find a bush to rest in time, it's actually worth it, because even though sprinting drains 2 times more blood, resting actually does the opposite and makes you bleed half as fast, which means you can undo it by resting. And one last thing I want to show you is that if you take bleed damage, you can actually roll in mud, which will also half the bleed. And something I just found out, which is kind of crazy, is that if you pair this with resting, you can stop the bleed entirely. But this next mistake is one that takes beginners way too long to realize they're making, which is leaving manual alt attack off. If you go to your settings and go to gameplay, then by default manual alt attack will be off, and what this means is that every time you do a bite while standing still, it'll do this long drawn out bite animation, like this. This attack is called an alt bite, and it can actually be pretty useful, because it does a little more damage and lets you attack in all directions. But that doesn't mean you want to do it every time, because sometimes you want to be able to do a normal bite, which allows you to pivot while biting without getting stuck in an animation. So if you haven't already, I'd recommend you open settings, go to gameplay, and switch on manual alt attack. And now you have the option to do both a normal bite by just clicking, or do an alt attack by holding alt. And these alt attacks are pretty useful because they let you bite behind you, but they also stun you for a second, so it's kind of a trade-off. And this actually matters a lot in combat, because with manual alt attack off, you'll be forced to do an alt attack every time, which means you'll constantly be getting stunned when you bite, and you won't be as agile as you need to be. But with manual alt attack on, now you'll be able to stay agile while biting your opponent, which is super useful. Now unfortunately, that is the end of this video, which means you will have to subscribe for more. Like you have to, it's not a choice. And comment if I missed anything to help out the newbies.